welcome to the Women Arise podcast. I'm your host, Neely Hicks, and with me today is Dr. Mario Mendez, who is the Director of Neurobehavior at the VA, Greater Los Angeles, and Professor of Neurology and Psychiatry at UCLA. He also directs the Frontotemporal Dementia and Neurobehavior Clinic. Did I get all that right, Dr. Mendez?
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
I'm so happy that you're with me. For the past several years, I've been teaching people the effects of emotional trauma on our brains. I've helped bring this information to lay people so they can then share that information with others and help them connect dots in their own lives about the effects of trauma on the brain. We have these innate survival mechanisms, primarily fight and flight, that have helped the human species survive for thousands of years. And there's so much more that we can learn about how the brain responds to different things that our bodies are experiencing. In my research, I found you, Dr. Mendez. Your work in neurology and in the study and science of hate are stellar. And as I've tried to understand what hate does to our bodies, I turn to you. So I want to welcome you and then turn it over to you for any opening remarks.
Thank you very much for this opportunity and for your laudatory introduction. I'm a behavioral neurologist, so my job is to look at the brain basis of a lot of human behavior, which all human behavior has to have something that mediates it in the brain. We're clear that the brain is a source of everything that we do. So in that journey, I found that very little was done on hate, which totally shocked me. I mean, this is hate is prominent, has had a prominent role in human history, significant cause of human suffering, and yet we've avoided it. I don't think by accident. I think there's been a kind of denial of looking at hate in terms of what in the brain is causing us to hate. And I think it stems from a fear that maybe we come with it. Maybe it's part of our heritage as human beings. And my research and others indicates that there's some truth to that. It isn't that we can't overcome it, but there are specific mechanisms in the brain that lead to hate.
Mhm. It is fascinating that it's not been studied because, and I think too that sometimes religion perpetuates this sense of brokenness that we've not been able to fully identify and understand to correct by just saying, well, we're sinful and this is just how human beings are. And for me, my quest for like being faithful is about, okay, how can I really fight against hate in all of its forms and injustices? And part of that is understanding, trying to understand, where does it come from physically? Because I don't think we really see this in other species so much, do we?
We don't see hate in the same way. In a closely related species, particularly uh, chimpanzees, for example, they do have the same brain mechanisms and the behaviors that can be interpreted as hate. For example, a fundamental mechanism that we come with is in-group versus out-group dichotomy. We have that module. We evolved that way. It was a socially valuable um, uh, cognitive mechanism built in order to enhance our group, survive as social groups, and protect ourselves from outside groups. And that leads to a lot of hateful behavior. You see that, for example, in chimpanzee troops, who fight over their if some over territory and other things, other food and uh, sexual partners and all of that, and that kind of behavior is really the basis of hate.
Mm. So fighting over things that are needed for survival.
Yes, I think that first, if I may, um, like a lot of behavioral things, you have to we have to start off defining what hate is in order to study it.
Yes.
So I would introduce my remarks by giving a definition of what I'm talking about. Um,
Yes.
I'm talking about a an aversion to others that drives one to want to expel them. And that expulsion can be physical, psychological, moral, um, avoidance, any of those. It doesn't have to do with harming them, but it's not really primarily about harming them. It's not really primarily about anger or any other associated primary emotion. If anything, it's closer to disgust. And it's more on the group level than it is on an individual level. And that goes all the way back to Aristotle, who defined the who made that distinction, and who introduced a lot of what I just said. So I think that a lot of that then can be traced to this in group versus out group dichotomy that we have, and the need to belong. Um, the one of your podcasts said that your interview with the neo Nazis was so tremendous because uh, I saw a lot of that in your interview, and you pointed it out that they need to belong. They need to have a sense of self worth as being part of this group, and that is the in group part of it. And in order to strengthen that in group part of it, you have to distinguish the bad out group. And so making the out group bad is a process of dehumanization.
Yes. I have worked quite a bit in Africa over the last 20 years and continue to work with people who I know and love there. And what comes to mind is about the genocide in Rwanda. And, I remember watching a documentary on Radio Okapi where they talked about um, on another particular radio station, they were calling people cockroaches in the days and months and however long prior to the genocide actually starting. And the dehumanization that you talk about really reminds me of that. Do you have any comments on like what happened in Rwanda, where people were fighting against their neighbors, against people that they had lived next to, possibly for generations, and then all of a sudden, in a split second, everything, any kind of good in their relationships with one another was lost and they just went into war.
Yes, I think that phenomena we have seen in other similar situations, including the Holocaust, including the current Gaza war that hopefully is coming to an end. And that is all of a sudden your neighbors are bad. And that word bad is, is crucial, critical, because it's not that your neighbors are cockroaches all of a sudden, or your neighbors are vermin, like the Nazis like to use, or some other pejorative thing. They are bad. And when we think of the word bad, we think of morality, we think of right and wrong. Uh, and how we view a person as having morality and being moral is intimately tied to how we see them as humans. The more moral we see somebody, the more human we think they are. So all of a sudden, all of these influences make you think your previously friendly neighbor is now an immoral, bad person with some nefarious intent, malevolent intent. And therefore, you are justified, you are righteously uh, 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 permitted to be, uh, to get rid of them any way that you can, even in the most physical and violent way. So there is moral righteousness, moral justification, um, which I think you showed in that video, um, and that that is and what can make that happen is hate speech and propaganda and constant bombardment with that message that these people are just they're bad, they're dirty, they're coming to pollute, um, they're going to rape your children or eat your pets or whatever.
That communications is so critically important in both stemming the tide of hate, but then also unleashing it. And do you have any comments about this era of social media? We know that Hitler happened in a time where there was no social media. So it doesn't depend upon social media for something like this to happen. But what do you think social media and that fermentation of hate growing with people connecting with other people who hate, what do you think the effect of that is just in more people finding their tribe among others who hate?
Yes, I think that people have written on the silo effect of of the internet, of social media, of different news channels, and it allows people to get a pretty consistent message that gives them confirms their belief systems and doesn't really expose them to alternative ways of looking. Um, people have said that it's not about truth. It's about facts. We all have the
Yes.
same facts, but what gives it truth to each of us as individuals is what kind of meaning we give to it, what perspective we see it, and how we view it, and how how we walk around a statue and we see different views. It's the same statue, and unless we can share that in a common venue or where we're being siloed into different philosophies and worldviews, and that's very that's not good. That's not good for the country or the world or communities.
Exactly. So, what is it? Can you describe, kind of on a lay person level, like what parts of our brains are most activated when we hate?
Well, I the what happens, I believe, is that all of these negative influences lead you to play on this in-group, out-group distinction that evolved in all those years when we were hunter-gatherers, um, and when we are bombarded with a message that that out-group is really, really bad, then we start to dehumanize them, and we dehumanize them in a moral sense, which leads to uh, uh, a sense of moral outrage and moral justification that you are. It's proper. It's virtuous to hate them. Um, we're indoctrinated to do that during wars. It's the enemy, and the enemy is are these bad people, and it's good to go kill them, um, or to expel them in some way. And so, what works in the brain then are several areas. One is they're all related to social brain mechanisms, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, deep in the frontal lobe, for example, which works to uh, takes a social situation and gives it emotional meaning. That you need that for empathy. You need that for relating with other people. That's partially turned off. Study after study, fMRI studies, functional magnetic resonance imaging studies, have shown that you're not, that part of the brain is turned off, and you're basically turning off empathy. Um, some of these studies have worked with pain. The mechanism where you experience pain in the brain is the same mechanism where you feel empathy when you see somebody else in pain. The same place in the brain lights up. You actually feel their pain. That's what empathy is in its strongest way, and that's turned off. So you're turning off this empathy, all of these empathy mechanisms in the brain. But what you're turning on, in contrast, what you're turning on several other mechanisms. One is the amygdala, which you may be familiar with, and often, and I think I read it in an article of yours. I think you just talked about the amygdala and how it has to do with fear, and this it lights up when you have some sense of threat, among other things. When you have a sense of threat, when you see somebody else, that becomes more active. And in fact, many studies have shown, for example, in this country, that white people will have their amygdala light up when they see a black person, uh, and have a greater sense of threat, and uh, that kind of thing. The other place it lights up is the insula, which has to do with emotional awareness, and in this regard, disgust. So, activity in the insula stimulates a sense of disgust. So you have mechanisms of the brain that decrease empathy, and mechanisms of the brain that light up with fear and disgust. So we see that pattern in the brain. You can take a picture of it. You can see those areas, some down and some up, and that is that's kind of a picture of hate in the brain.
Wow. Wow. So it's interesting about empathy being turned off because in my relationships that I have with beautiful people from Rwanda who some still live there, some do not. But I remember listening to a woman from Rwanda speak at an event in Cape Town, South Africa. And she talked about the loss of family and lives. And then she was working with a program that I think the initials were PHARP. And I can't tell you exactly what those letters all represent. But she was talking to me about it being a peace building coalition. And so I said to her, so what does peace look like in a situation like this? And she said, well, for 3 days, the killers and survivors come together and they bare their hearts to one another. And then we give them work to do together. We give them a plot of land so that they can farm together side by side. And there were other programs and things that they also would do together, like rebuild the roadways or rebuild the homes of the widows and help in other ways. But she said that essentially that work came out of the government saying, we don't have enough prisons to hold all of the killers. We've got to find another way. And she told me a story about one of the women who was working alongside one of the killers, and that she noticed that that man and his family were suffering, that they didn't have enough to eat. They didn't have what they needed to survive. And over the course of them working together, she began looking at him as family. While she had lost her own, she took on his family as her own. And I remember thinking at that point, okay, if I didn't believe in God before, I believe in God now, because how can something like that happen? I think, though, that in that kind of work, there was a chance for empathy building that would then turn what was the lack of empathy into empathy. Do you see like up close relationships being one of the ways that we can heal from hate?
Oh, yes. And that's a beautiful example. Thank you for that. Actually, it's called contact theory. And I mean, I read about these things. I haven't done any work in that area, but uh, bringing Palestinian and Israeli kids together and seeing that they're humanizing them, seeing that they have values and beliefs that are good and not bad, that they actually are moral beings, and in the process, they are they are individualized because what happens for to have hate, you see the bad group as all the same. They're all alike. Um, but when you have these contexts like that, you see, no, this particular person, yeah, he belongs to that group, but he's 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 an individual human. He's individualized, as well as having uh, values and morality. And it's that process. It's easier said than done, but that's what that's some of the most effective mechanisms for ameliorate, not just ameliorating, but just getting rid of hate are those. Um,
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I want to now read more about contact theory. I've wondered for ages, like about the segregation in the South and how that just really creates a sense of otherness, um, that didn't have to be there. That it, and across our nation, it's not just segregation based on race, it's segregation based on socioeconomic status, making people who are wealthy, really at peace with saying that people who are not wealthy, lazy and stupid, versus like actually trying to understand what it is that they've gone through in their lives, what has brought them to this point, and what has kept them at this point. Um, so I think our systems of engagement around contact theory, it could be a fascinating thing to really work more in studies around that in areas where people are having more contact with people who are different from them. Any words about that?
No, I think that that's crucial, and it's not now. Now, 2025. There's also a political divide that is segregating,
Yes.
and there are blue states and red states, and um, in neighborhoods that have political differences where they don't talk to each other now.
Yes.
Um, and unless they're forced to, unless there have to be venues, mechanisms, ways for everyone to come together and to feel free to talk. Uh, everyone frequently you hear this example. Well, uh, Thanksgiving dinner, and we didn't. I didn't speak to my cousin because they have a different point of view, and that's just you have to talk to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So true. So, one last question. Can hate become addictive?
well, that's an interesting question. There are some people. I wish I could quote people. I wish I could quote these articles. The authors deserve attribution, but I can't remember. But I think it was Peggy Noonan, the journalist, who wrote something about the um, that hate is addictive and it's pleasurable, and people can learn to love it and want it and pursue it, and like Schadenfreude, pleasure from somebody else's pain, but at a group level. Um, there was a monograph written in the 19th century by a guy named William Hazlitt. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's called "On the Pleasure of Hating," and he writes in it that we have a secret affinity, a hankering after evil in the human mind that leads us to want to enjoy hating. Uh, so there, there is uh, there in some of these neurologic studies, several areas having to do with pleasure can be active during the process of hate. So
Yeah.
uh, it
And
is it can be pursued as a pleasurable thing. Unfortunately,
that is unfortunate because we are pleasure seeking creatures. So, we certainly have our work cut out for us in what we can do from the science that is out there. Because I believe that when we apply science and we start working more to understand why we are the way we are, that we can then work towards changing who we are into more loving creatures who work on behalf of all for love and peace and justice and hope and equity. Um, Even when people outlaw the term, um, it's we can still work towards um, diversity, equity, and inclusion because at the heart of that, I believe, is the love of Christ, who um, did not turn his back on those who were different from him, different from religion or whatever, but strove to help and then also to teach the disciples to help regardless. So that is my hope for the world. And yes, we've got our work cut out for us. Dr. Mendez, thank you so much for this interview today. Is there anything in closing you'd like to say?
again, I admire your work greatly, and keep it up.
Thank